I received a music cassette with Tchaikovsky music and Don Cossack choir. When I tell you something, take note and believe nothing, especially when dealing with governments. The big problem was corruption. That hasn't been completely resolved. The trend is your friend. Corruption is something human. The Russophobia completely underestimated.
Hello, dear ones. I am Problem Pony Mia, and today I have Dr. Peter Hanseler in conversation. Hello, Peter. I am glad you are here.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for taking the time. Today we are talking about you, your work, and geopolitics. But let's start with you. You are a lawyer and publicist. You have been traveling to Russia for almost 30 years. And the first thing that interests me, how did you develop an interest in Russia? And what fascinates you about Russia?
My fascination with Russia is very, very old.
I received a music cassette from my grandmother, who traveled everywhere and spoke 7 languages, after a trip to Russia when I was 5 years old. That was 1969. With Tchaikovsky music and the Don Cossack choir. And the music touched me deeply. Beautiful. I have always loved music since I was a very, very young boy. And of course, then Mozart. It's so easy to digest and also beautiful music.
But Russian music has such a unique tone, and that fascinated me a lot. And then my father was a typical, he said, yeah, those damn communists, and so on. And then I asked my grandmother, somehow, when I saw her again, I said, Grandma, how is it possible that such bad people can make such beautiful music? How is it? Asked a 5-year-old. And then she said, you know, when you look at things up close, they look completely different. That had a big impact on my life. She was always open to things that were frowned upon in our society. So I almost had anarchistic traits, and as a true Swiss, you almost have to be an anarchist. Unfortunately, that was lost in the last few years. I mean, the skepticism towards the state, skepticism towards power. I then, of course, grew up in Switzerland. And then I also was in military service. And in military service, in every exercise, the enemy was red and came from the east. That naturally has an effect on people. I then came to Moscow for the first time in 1997 as a lawyer for a client from Switzerland. I had to do a joint venture, a real estate joint venture. I had to do it with a Russian partner. That was very interesting. But in 1997, Russia was really in a very, very difficult situation. It was all gray. It was not nice. There were a very few, very rich people, and otherwise everything was poor. But the beauty of the city, I recognized that very quickly because I came to Russia with an open mind, let's say, with an open mind. And of course, I was able to follow the entire, the development of Russia over the last 28 years. Above all, I was able to follow the performance of the Putin government. I also had a business here, had employees, and saw how positively the country has developed in the last quarter century, I would say, and how large the middle class is today, how well people are doing here, how satisfied people are without losing skepticism. I always say the Russians are the biggest skeptics, and a friend of mine, Dirk Pullman, told me he saw a study that confirms this statistically. He hasn't sent it to me yet, but that's my gut feeling.
They'll say, that they question
They
everything.
question everything. And if I tell you something, you take note of it and believe nothing. And that is a very, very healthy character trait, especially when dealing with governments, including your own, no matter where you live.
Now you said, you had a business in Russia. Can you compare what it's like economically as a business owner in Switzerland or the West and in Russia? Where does one feel more comfortable as a business owner?
Well, I had a business, and one didn't feel very comfortable at that time. So I opened the business in the year 2000 or 2001.
Yes.
And the corruption was a huge problem. But of course, I know many people for a long time who have a business and run businesses. The big problem was the corruption. That hasn't been completely resolved. But when I ask my friends today, how is it compared to 25 years ago? They say the corruption is 80 to 90% less. So the trend is your friend. The development is certainly a positive one. Although corruption, that is not something Russian. Corruption is something human.
Yeah.
Give people the opportunity to steal money, and they will do it. And the best antidote to corruption is simplified procedures. So when we were building, we somehow had to have 600 or 700 different permits for real estate business. Of course, it opens the door wide for corruption. Today, everything is much, much simpler. That means the more transparent the laws are, the less corruption there is. And you can see that now if you look to the West. It is becoming more complex. The laws are becoming more complex. And with that, in the West, the corruption is rampant now, especially in the EU.
Indeed. Yes, that would have been my next question about the situation with the corruption in the EU. Well, you run the Geopolitica Forum. How did you come to start your journey with Geopolitica? And what is the main idea behind Geopolitica?
So, the Geopolitica Forum, the name is relatively new. We changed the name. We changed the name in May. I have actually always written articles for various newspapers in Switzerland. And after the war began, I was published less and less. And then I decided to start a blog. And it was called Voice from Russia. That was the name. I mean, it was a Swiss voice from Russia. And yes, at the very beginning, I somehow had only about 200 views, and it has developed relatively well. And today I believe 13 authors write the top articles for us. And with further distribution and republishing, we sometimes reach 200,000 views. And regarding the name, I was of course naive. Anything that has Russia in the name, well, I also completely underestimated Russophobia in November 2022. For 1.5 years, we had the plan to relaunch this website. But I actually do this with my wife, more or less a two-person operation. And I have a few colleagues who help a bit. And of course, everything takes a bit longer. And we wanted to create something nice. And the site we have now is really very nice. And it is available in 4 languages now. So we have German, Russian, English, and French. And the next language will very likely be Spanish. And that is a huge effort because translating it with artificial intelligence would be dangerous, as we already write about relatively controversial topics, not just about Russia. We write fundamentally about geopolitics, a lot about China, about BRICS, also about Germany, even about Switzerland. If Switzerland is still geopolitically important, and we write a lot about the United States, because I have studied and lived in the United States. So I know the country relatively well and have very good contacts with geopolitical analysts there. Yes, so forumgeopolitica.com is definitely a place where you can find interesting articles, and we go in depth. We don't do news, we're just too small for that.
Political analyses.
Yes, we do geopolitical analyses, and they are relatively in-depth. The articles are sometimes also long, and I know that in today's TikTok era, it's difficult to convey that people might take 20 minutes to read an interesting article. But that's the audience we cater to.
Now you just said you underestimated Russophobia. How does Russophobia manifest itself to you? Where did you notice it?
Well, everywhere. When, for example, it depends a bit, but so when I meet people in Switzerland and say I live in Russia, they are very surprised. They say, how can you? So the image of Russia is completely wrong. So they just don't know. I mean, Moscow is very likely the city with the greatest sex appeal in Europe. Definitely modern. You get everything. It's affordable to live here compared to Western Europe. The people are open. You are welcomed. The Russians are extremely warm and hospitable. Hospitable, they are skeptics, just skeptics. You will not become friends with a Russian within 15 minutes, like with an American, for example. But yes, I feel at home here. And people are, of course, brainwashed, even in Switzerland. I mean, the media are so anti-Russian, and this has not just been the case since 2022. It has certainly been like this since 2014, and fundamentally always.
What do you think needs to happen for people in Germany and Switzerland so that they gradually start rethinking?
Travel. I have never met people with prejudices who have traveled. It doesn't really matter whether you travel to Russia. You don't have to travel to Russia. Travel to Asia. Travel to the Middle East. Just travel. People who travel are not racist.
The problem is that, I believe that the people living in Europe now have such a poor standard of living that they soon won't be able to afford to travel at all.
Yes, that adds to it. But it is, the politicians are Russophobic in the West. Of course, there are practically always some commendable exceptions. I would say 95% of the media are Russophobic. Yes, and we are getting to the point where in Germany, the whole history of the Second World War is more or less being turned around. I have already heard that the attack on Russia in 1941 was actually a preemptive strike. So, I mean,
Yeah.
they have lost their marbles, and this is now simply, being prepared, systematically prepared, a war with Russia, especially in Germany. I mean, when you hear the politicians there, what they say, you really think you're in the wrong place, like you're in the wrong movie.
Do you believe the German government could still be dissuaded from this war-hungry mindset? Because when you listen to what Merz says, actually almost the entire German government says, you really believe we're almost at war with them. However, Russia has no interest in that at all. How can the situation be relaxed or diffused?
Yes, the Germans have the divine ability to run their country into the ground. It wouldn't be the first time. And Mr. Merz's approval rating is now somewhere around 21%.
Yeah.
Well, it is abysmal.
Yes.
As a voter, I have to ask myself, why does he still have the job? Just imagine you have a company, 89% of the entire workforce is against you. This company cannot be managed, and the leadership would need to be replaced. I don't know what has to happen. It is also extremely difficult to judge because the media in Germany go hand in hand with the government
Yes.
and also the large industry. Well, that is the definition of fascism um, um, uh, when when economy and government come together. And then what you now hear on the German Tagesschau, on ARD or ZDF, is very likely not the opinion of the average German. That is pure propaganda. When you talk to Germans, surprisingly, there are more and more people who no longer believe these stories coming from Berlin. The problem with the Germans is that they are simply obedient to authority.
Yes.
We Swiss are actually not better than the Germans, and we are not smarter than the Germans. But we are more skeptical towards power. Our policy towards Russia is also disastrous, or even more disastrous than that of Germany, because we have given up neutrality, trampled on it, and still claim that we are neutral. It's an absolute joke. But in Germany, people really need to stand up. I don't know what I would do there now. I have a slightly anarchistic tendency, maybe a general strike, or that all companies say, we will no longer pay the value-added tax. We will not pay taxes anymore. We will only maintain what is necessary for the people to survive, and otherwise, passive resistance. And I don't know, I'm just scared. I'm just scared when you look at the history of Germany, that people don't notice or don't want to notice. A German friend of mine, and we have many German authors on our blog, he told me last week, yes, the Germans are sleeping while standing. So they don't realize what a slippery slope Germany is on. And that's not just geopolitically, it's also economically.
Yeah.
I mean, we can also say a heartfelt thank you to Mrs. Merkel. That is relatively, the bad decisions, political decisions were made well over 10 years ago. And then there's also the fact that, for example, the automotive industry, large industries like Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, they have also made wrong decisions. It all comes together. But I am quite pessimistic about Germany, not only for Germany, also for France, and actually for the entire EU on the Western side, one way or another. But the people do not react. It's a mystery to me that people do not notice, especially with Germany's history. They only notice when it's too late, and then they can't do anything anymore.
Do you see anyone in German or European politics who could perhaps be considered a glimmer of hope?
Yes, well, now I'm optimistic. There are, I always say that the percentage of absolutely incompetent fools is fairly distributed in this world. They exist here too. They also exist in Switzerland. They exist in America, everywhere. The quality of a society is shown by whether these complete idiots come to the surface and rise. That means the selection process is very, very unfortunate. If you look at the competence of politicians in the West, quite the opposite of the competence here in Russia. The people understand. Compare Lavrov and Baerbock or whatever, Or take Nabulina as the central banker. Yes, competence is in demand in this country and is promoted. That is a problem in the West. You will also find very, very capable people in Germany, as in any other country. So that is never the question. You have capable people. The problem is, how do you find them, and are they promoted? And I assume that capable people are not wanted at all. They want pliable, bought people. I mean, I see that Mertz is, of course, the prime example of the bought rooster, and they are all deep state boys who are bought and shaped. And the dumber they are, the easier it is to give them the list in the morning of what they have to say and do.
I think the Germans still have to endure and put up with it a little bit. I mean, the Poles also took a long time. But with the recent events with the drones, I find it super funny that the Poles are suddenly becoming a bit more pro-Russian and opposing the government. I hope that something like that happens in Germany someday, that people wake up. Peter, if you could share one thought with our viewers, especially the German-speaking ones, what would it be?
Be skeptical and believe nothing. Yes, reserve belief for Sunday in church. There you can believe. But if you believe everything, it doesn't get you further in life. Not in your own life, and not in political life.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for being here. Folks, that's it from us for today. Feel free to leave us a comment, please share and like the video, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.